The Goblin of Oyeyama by F. Hadland Davis. In the reign of Emperor Ichijo, many fearful stories were current in Kyoto in regard to a demon that lived on Mount Oi. This demon could assume many forms. Sometimes appearing as a human being, he would steal into Kyoto and leave many a home destitute of well-loved sons and daughters. These young men and women he took back to his mountain stronghold, and sad to narrate, after making sport of them, he and his goblin companions made a great feast and devoured these poor young people. Even the sacred court was not exempt from these awful happenings, and one day Kimitaka lost his beautiful daughter. She had been snatched away by the Goblin King Shutendoji. When this sad news reached the ears of the emperor, he called his council together and consulted how they might slay this dreadful creature. His ministers informed His Majesty that Raiko was a doughty knight and advised that he should be sent with brave companions on this perilous but worthy adventure. Raiko accordingly chose 5 companions and told them what had been ordained and how they were to set out upon an adventurous journey and finally to slay the king of the goblins. Raiko explained that subtlety of action was most essential if they wished for success in their enterprise. He proposed that it would be well to go disguised as mountain priests and to carry their armor and weapons on their backs, carefully concealed in unsuspicious-looking knapsacks. Before starting upon their journey, 2 of the knights went to pray at the temple of Hachiman, the god of war, while 2 others went to the shrine of Kanon, the goddess of mercy, and yet another 2 at the temple of Gongan. Once again, Raiko and his knights, much cheered by what had happened, continued to ascend the mountain. Coming to a stream, they noticed a beautiful woman washing a blood-stained garment in the running water. She was weeping bitterly and wiped away her tears with the long sleeve of her kimono. Upon Raiko asking who she was, she informed him that she was a princess and one of the miserable captives of the Goblin King. When she was told that it was none other than great Raiko who stood before her and that he and his knights had come to kill the wild creature of the mountain, she was overcome with joy and finally led the little band to a great palace of black iron, satisfying the sentinels by telling them that her followers were poor mountain priests who sought temporary shelter. After passing through long corridors, Raiko and his knights found themselves in a mighty hall. At one end sat the awful Goblin King. He was of gigantic stature, with bright red skin and a mass of white hair. When Raiko meekly informed him who they were, the Goblin King, concealing his mirth, bade them be seated and join the feast that was about to be set before them. Thereupon he clapped his red hands together, and immediately many beautiful damsels came running in with an abundance of food and drink. And as Raiko watched these women, he knew that they had once lived in happy homes in Kyoto. When the feast was in full progress, Raiko took out the jar of magic sake and politely begged the Goblin King to try it. The monster, without demur or suspicion, drank some of the sake and found it so good that he asked for a second cup. All the goblins partook of the magic wine, and while they were drinking, Raiko and his companions danced. The power of this magical drink soon began to work. The Goblin King became drowsy till finally he and his fellow goblins fell fast asleep. Then Raiko sprang to his feet, and he and his knights rapidly donned their armor and prepared for war. Once more, the three deities appeared before them and said to Raiko, "We have tied the hands and feet of the demon fast, so you have nothing to fear. While your knights cut off his limbs, do you cut off his head, then kill the rest of the Oni and your work will be done." Then these divine beings suddenly disappeared. Raiko slays the goblin. Raiko and his knights, with their swords drawn cautiously, approached the sleeping Goblin King. With a mighty sweep, Raiko's weapon came crashing down on the goblin's neck. No sooner was the head severed than it shot up into the air, and smoke and fire poured out from the nostrils, scorching the valiant Raiko. Once more he struck out with his sword, and this time the horrible head fell to the floor and never moved again. It was not long before these brave knights dispatched the demon's followers also. There was a joyful exit from the great iron palace. Raiko's 5 knights carried the monster head of the Goblin King, and this grim spectacle was followed by a company of happy maidens, released at last from their horrible confinement and eager to walk once again in the streets of Kyoto. The end. This story is brought to you by Cultural Cafe. Cultural Cafe is an initiative that strives to narrate the stories of our nation's diversity. It hopes to build bridges to keep kindness, common ground, inclusion, and empathy alive through storytelling. Please support Cultural Cafe by liking, subscribing, or commenting. Thank you.